All right. Well, welcome to Talk Data to me, Warren. We're really excited to have you. Everybody, this is Warren Stokes. Warren has his own consulting agency, and he's a 2020 Marketo Champion. And, we've been tracking Warren as one of our data heroes. And so I'd like to learn a little bit more about your journey. First off, Warren, just tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a Marketo champion.
Oh, it's a long old story, so I'm not sure we've got too much time, but it's interesting. It started from like really early, I guess, my journey, because I was always a naughty kid at school, right? And what that entailed is being told off a lot. And so as a result of that, I tried to recognize patterns in my head of like why people were doing things and just a natural curiosity for human psychology. And then the next part of that is I was maybe 15 years old, sitting in my business studies class and telling me about all these different companies that use human psychology there. I'm like, this could be really interesting. So I've always loved that nature of human psychology in the marketing. Now, naturally, as that's progressed through my career, that's just been driven to data as a natural curiosity to be able to look at it from the lens of human psychology and how can we touch different points. So and through that it's just led to, well, this different piece of technology does this and this connects the dots to help me really focus on where we could go with creativity. And that's what gets me into campaign ops. That's why I guess I've been invited here today, and maybe why I'm a Marketo champion.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that data hero journey, right? Because you work with Marketo, but I'm sure you work with a bunch of other systems, and understanding the architecture and how data flows and all of the different intricacies. I'd like to hear how you kind of your journey, and also that becoming a data hero.
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about my kind of curiosity about the human psychology and kind of pushing campaigns as far as they go. And I think on the data side and the technology side there, I try and break stuff. And what I mean by that is I want it to do something. Like I want it to do something. I have an idea in my head. I'm going to work out how to do that. Or I'm going to work out like how I get the data to be able to support my argument to present to key stakeholders of why it's a good idea. Because I have some different crazy ideas about different campaigns, and often I need that, like whatever data it is, or some kind of supportive argument. So it's just again coming from the natural curiosity to learn, but also break stuff and get it to do what I want it to do, from a campaign perspective.
Well, it's awesome. I think we're going to dig into some of the specifics of what you're talking about throughout the interview here. But I want to start high level. And, one of the things that we find is that when, us in our ops positions look to get projects approved at an executive level for data, right? Whether it's data hygiene, data automation, data orchestration. Typically, that can be met with a kind of a cold, hard stare. And so I'm wondering, and I'm sure the audience would love to know how you position the cost of dirty data on Marketo, and then just on marketing in general.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it stems kind of right back to who I am as a person, and I really kind of look at myself every now and again. But I try and figure out the stakeholder who I'm talking to, what is their personality. I almost speak to them like I would a prospect and try and really figure out what makes them tick, and that's how I almost present my argument and kind of where we should be doing stuff. So the cost of dirty data there is really, is it going to be relevant to their role, and how do I position it and tell that story that way? So I think about telling the story from looking at the data and what it's going to mean for their role specifically, their team specifically, and the business in its entirety. So it becomes a conversation of there. It's not the cost of dirty data as a siloed approach. Is it actually, what does it mean for the teams? What does it mean where we're going for the future, and what does it mean for the business? It's a cohesive story, and that's the way I really look at it.
Yeah, I love that answer. I actually have been, selling software for many years, and the first thing we do, because we sell software for data, is not try to sell software for data. It's provide a roadmap to interviewing departments to identify their objectives and mapping data to those objectives, so that whatever project you have and you want to get approved maps back up to the actual core business objectives, all the way down to the field levels that are required to manage them. So I love the answer there. Do you have any specific reports or ways that you either analyze the health of the data in your Marketo or maintain it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So obviously, being a Marketo champion, Marketo is one of my things, my go-to, if you like. It always has been, because I can do so much with it. So a specific report that I like to use, and it kind of extends beyond pivot tables that I can manipulate almost quite manually, because I don't mind the manual manipulation necessarily if it gets me a result that's going to give me a return on investment of that manual input, right? So there's that element there. So what I do is I use people performance reports within Marketo, and that's a kind of a fancy pivot table, but it means that I can analyze people at lots of different stages by kind of connecting smart lists into it and pulling lots of stuff into it. And then Marketo does the math, if you like, for it. Also kind of really, I look at quite a lot of Salesforce reports as well, in terms of like opportunities and tracking back from those opportunities, and then on their behavior and touch points there, because sometimes I can't get everything in Marketo, and some of that is the behavior afterwards, because anything that I try and look at from a campaign perspective has to be tied up to the conversations they're going to have later down the line. So I'm very conscious that as marketers grow into different technologies, is remembering what happens when the actual conversation's happening. Never lose sight of that consistent story. Otherwise, you'll see an inconsistency in how your campaign will perform, because the real storytellers are the sales guys that pick on the phone. That's their bread and butter. Like you correctly highlighted, John, you've sold kind of software for a while, so naturally your go-to is to tell a cohesive story, and those guys are the experts. So it's always good to touch base with people on the other side, and that can be people such as customer success as well. Get the full picture.
So, I know that Marketo specifically, and most marketing automation systems, charge by the number of people you host in them. And do you have any advice on what are the indicators of a record in Marketo that should be removed to make up for storage?
I'm actually quite strict on this one. Like if I had it my way, and quite often my clients will disagree, I would just delete anyone that hasn't done anything in 6 months, because they don't care, right? Like you could argue that it depends on your timeline of how long it takes to kind of reach out into that company and kind of your sales timeline. But anyone that doesn't do anything, if they're interested, they're going to come back, right? So I would do that. But also, don't forget that Marketo has durable unsubscribes. I'll just stop the dog barking.
That's true. What about, I know that you work with a lot of global data sets. Are there any, tricks and tips for enabling a more compliant process for what data you're using or ingesting in your Marketo?
Cool. I think the key to that is kind of having documentation and processes, but not for processes' sake, because processes are often seen as not very flexible at all. But I do like to document why we're doing things, how that's being done, so there's no missing parts. I think that's kind of what you're getting onto, but I think it's if something happens to that person who's designed this process, you'll see it with a lot of companies that there's, well, why have we got this data and where did it come from? Or, you see that so much and you kind of think, well, if actually someone documented properly, then we'll be able to use that and then keep layering on top of that.
Great. I'm going to switch gears a little bit here to chat about third-party data providers. And I'm wondering, do you have experience with your clients utilizing third-party data sources like, the traditionals or even niche providers that get into healthcare or higher ed or, some very niche data sets?
Yeah, so if I go back like sort of maybe 6 or 7 years, right? I used to be one of the guys that could use import.io in its early stages and literally scrape the website for the attendees or present the people that would be having stands at a trade show and just grab all their email addresses and sell them stuff, right? But then over time you start to go, well, actually, and I think it goes to say how kind of far developed we are. Like if you did that now, there'd be a very negative reaction. And I feel the same about buying data as well. And there's loads of different companies that will sell you data, of which of questionable quality. But I think the opportunity now is to think about what data you do have and what you can do to enrich that. So I think similar to what RingLead does in terms of connecting you with the data providers to fill in the gaps, if you like, because one of the things that's key for me is that true understanding of who you're trying to market to, or the true understanding of the prospect. Have you really got that full picture? And there may be variances there or different ways of targeting or speaking to them, or even just the generation of ideas. I think enrichment of data is such a big thing, and making sense of that as well, where it doesn't become too difficult for a human to be able to have a creative idea on the back of it.
So there are a lot of choices out there for who you're going to choose to enrich data, and I have a lot of ideas on how to figure out which vendors to work with and unique use cases. But I'm wondering, do you have any sort of evaluation process for figuring out which vendor is going to be right for, or vendors are going to be right for any enrichment project?
Yeah, it's a good one. I think my first and almost sole question is on match rate, because it's kind of a trust thing, right? I could get any data from anywhere. I want to know like the match rate based on a certain variable, and that's really key to me to really go, I would rather have less trustworthy data than more questionable data, because once you start to muddy the waters, the data within your marketing, then I think you start to lose the reins a bit. So always focus on quality, and the match rate is a key question to ask on that.
Awesome. Are you an advocate for using business variables in your demographic lead scoring, or do you just utilize things like persona and the actual activity that a person is having on a site? I've seen two different kind of thought processes. One is like, I care about what businesses are engaging with my marketing campaigns more than I really care about what they're engaging with. But then there's the others that really only care about whether a person is engaging at all, and that's how their scoring is done. So do you find that you ever incorporate business attributes in a demographic person lead score?
I think because we've spoken a couple of times, John, you could probably guess my answer on a lot of these things. I really care about the end user of that data. So I care about a sales guy looking at that person that's got a score and truly understanding that and truly being able to see that as valuable. So I've often gone right the simplistic route and just looked at what are the collection of variables that are important to someone that's going to pick up the phone to them. And I would collect a series of engagement with different assets and just literally set that as one. So I've had scoring models as simple as 1, 2, or 3 as a flag to the person on the other end that's going to know whether that's right, because they all have in their own mind what companies and target accounts they're going to try and speak to, right? What they need is a simple mechanism to identify how active they've been. So I often look at collections of different variables as almost interpretive behavior, i.e., I don't care that they've opened an email. If I ever had a sales guy phone me and just said, hey, I've noticed you've opened 15 emails, I'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? Right? Like, I still today wonder why people score on opens and clicks and like that. It's what does that represent as a collective behavior? And what does that tell me about the organization? And just make it then simple for the end user of that. I still think that's just it's not thought of enough. Is the end user of the person that's going to look at that scoring and go, hey, why has that guy's score got a 6,800? Yeah, perfect. That's really useful. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it brings up an actual conversation we had internally recently, because the whole scores and clicks, we actually removed them because of just the bot clicks and the bot opens. And have you figured out any way to get around like actual bots clicking on emails or links within emails and destroying lead score models, or is there a way to remove those?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, don't base your whole lead score model around it, first of all.
I agree.
Equally, there's like Pardot does it automatically. It's in discussions, I think, at the Marketo side to really filter that out. But a mechanism that I use is I look for people that have clicked all the links before they've opened the email as a timestamp. I also use a honeypot approach where I put a hidden link within the email template. So then naturally I can filter out anyone that has clicked that link because it doesn't make any sense. This is like
that's a good idea. The hidden honeypot link. I love that one. That's gold for any of the listeners right there. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, I think it goes from because why the link gets clicked in the first place by the bots is they're often scanning to see if they're safe, right? So it's going to scan all the links.
All right. What about, do you have any methodologies for identifying what personas are ideal within a buying cycle?
That's a very interesting question. What personas in a buying cycle? Because often nowadays there's so many variables that go into that, in company size, culture. Culture is an ever more present one when we look at, well, actually we have a really flat leadership structure, and you can look at that, what does that actually mean? Does that mean they all get in a room and have a conversation before about it? Or does it mean that's what they represent and everyone is a senior manager, but actually there's a hot-headed COO at the helm of that? And it's when you think about those variables there, it starts to get quite interesting. And I think looking at it, a very simplistic view is that you have to appeal to the most amount of people in that company as you can. And you look at that from a marketing perspective and you go, how does my message hit home with the group of people, or this? Is there a bigger group that I can identify within, I don't know, IT specialists, or is there a smaller group? And it gets into that behavioral data to try and figure out not just who they are and where they sit, but actually how they influence the business. Because naturally someone looking at different aspects of a tool that they don't already own, but is just an IT administrator, maybe doing research, and you can interpret from their behavior where they stand in the culture. So really, I take a more detailed approach into that, and don't necessarily try and categorize into buyer personas, but try and look at behaviors, and try and, as much as I can, ignore what it says on their title and just really look at their buying behaviors early on and early signals there. So what that means from a prospecting perspective is really try and get web data as much as possible, behavioral data. Your brand holds a lot of weight, and it still does. So to give you an example, when I did some subcontracting at Google, they had massive open rates because it was reflective of their brand. Now you take that one level further and you go, okay, what was the people that actually opened and did that kind? What's their sub level? What's their interaction with the brand? And then use that to build like a nurture of on the back of it. Cold stuff doesn't work anymore. It's brand and advertising still has such a massive part to play, which I don't think people often realize. They just go, well, let's scrape some data and send out some cold emails. Good luck.
I think it's a great, point that you need to basically influence as many people in a company as you can with positive messaging, which just makes marketing that more important and gives us that much more responsibility. Now, once you understand personas, right? Because it sounds like it's not something you massively rely on to. Obviously, you're going to segment, personalized campaigns based on persona, but you're trying to really influence an organization and make sure that the brand has a reputation that allows for better, testing of that journey. But when you do really understand different personas that impact, and you want to personalize and group content to them, have you found that using native Marketo normalization or segmentation is either brutally time consuming or bandwidth intensive on writing updates or grouping records based on massive amounts of a segmentation or normalization logic?
I think where you're getting to is, where do you start with all of that, right? And I think you have to look at, if you're starting from scratch and it's day one and you go, right, I'm going to approach account-based marketing, or this is our new initiative to target this market. The starting point for that will be, let's look at what competitors are doing. What kind of mails do I get from my competitors who are all doing the same research, right? And you can sign up with as many job titles as you want and then cut in a prospects database. Right? Why not? I could put as many different email addresses and fake job titles and the rest of it, and see what segmentation they do on me. They'll never know. I know that for a fact, right? I've done it so many times. That's where I'd start. But then your point about the segmentation is, you need to, in order to have a segmentation, you need to have the data in the first place, and you need to have some database to segment on. So the starting point is always going to be based on what data you have, and what you can do there. And that might be best just going, right, I'm going to test something radical and see what happens, and then I'm going to segment the engaged people to those more radical things. Or it might just be something as simple as, our hypothesis here is that people react differently in this industry to our messaging versus this industry, or even we have something different to say because it makes sense, right? So I take a very individualized approach from anyone that I work with, because maybe overly so sometimes. Some people have to rein me in, but I think it's it's really important to understand that audience, but it starts from somewhere, and wherever you start, as long as it can give you some next steps, it actually doesn't matter too much. You just need to be testing and learning as much as you can. So you just pick something, take industry, what tests are we going to get, what are we going to learn by targeting them differently, and you'll get something else to target on then.
Wonderful. I'm going to switch gears again a little bit to a different topic in just data management. Marketo, one of the things I just don't understand why it's not native with Marketo is the ability to link a person in the marketing database to an account in the CRM. And that really limits attribution and just understanding an account journey, because having people disassociated to businesses in B2B marketing removes campaign attribution and your ability to actually understand the actions of a business throughout a buying cycle or an education cycle. And so I'm wondering what you do to solve that problem of the lead database or the person database in Marketo not having any native logic up to the account object in Salesforce.
I think it depends how much that account is worth to you, right? So if I take like a massive company, I go, well, the return on investment of me doing something a little bit manual is worth X to the company. It's worth something doing a little bit manual. That's what I think I always forget. Like, manual isn't awful if it offers so much value to the company. So often I've taken one account that they really want to get, and put together a whole marketing campaign and plan towards just targeting that account in different ways, or even prompting their competitors to have a look at their site and just some weird stuff like that. And to answer your question, my main thing though tends to be looking at what target accounts there are and just mapping that out as a category in what other marketing system I'm using, because those are the ones that the business has told me is most valuable to them. And then within that, I'm going to have a collection of different job titles. I'm going to build up new connections that are kind of coming from marketing. But as long as I'm looking for that company or variations in that company and looking to standardize any of their company names, then I'm going to be able to identify them. So the main thing is identify those target accounts as early as you can and look for that in your marketing database.
So let's just say you identify the target accounts, you manually associate all the people in the database to those accounts. Now you start marketing to them, right? You do your multi-channel marketing, your outreaching. And now what typically I find happens is that those people that you're marketing to start to forward emails to other people or talk about it at a management meeting. And those now new people come to your inbound channels to do research on ebooks or submit a demo request form or whatever. But again, Marketo, when those engagements happen to the new people that weren't known to your original research, engage through your inbound channels now and aren't automatically basically handed off to that account owner or the team that manages the account. The fact that Marketo can't automatically link a lead to an account, like, do you have any automated solution or like workaround for associating a new person in the marketing database to an account and the ownership of the account and the relationship?
Yeah, I see. I guess not, actually, to answer your question. And the reason that is that I tend to focus on, I think that's more of a system thing, I think. But I tend to get an answer with my route, and I tend to get an answer when I meet with salespeople and they go, well, how did the account perform, or how are they engaging? So I don't have an automated route, actually. There'll be better people or more technical people than me, but my thing is always kind of the marketing side and the creativity behind that. Mm-hmm. And kind of just touching on something you were talking to there, when you start going going out to them is you better be darn sure that your message is going to hit home, and that will take research on their LinkedIn, their interests. Like I've done marketing campaigns for financial services targeted like about golf results, because I know that you can tell that the main guy is obsessed with golf and he's sharing stuff about golf. So I want to influence conversations within that business and within his team. So it's a really hard look on the exact message that you're sending and why you'd send it. And it can be something completely random, I say random, but very, very off the wall. But as long as it's related to that main person or main collection of people, but there is a lot that goes into the campaign side that I think is so important when it comes to sort of talking to target accounts and stuff like that. But to answer your question, I don't really have an automated way, but I think it's worth spending sometimes manual effort to do a little bit of sophisticated, decent, well thought out, targeted marketing campaigns and working with your salespeople there to even identify the conversations you need to be having.
Critical, absolutely. Now let's talk about the assignment of new data, right? So you are building this infrastructure to automate lead processes, right? And a lead engages, maybe they become an MQL or fill out a contact us form or whatever it may be. Do you typically find that assignment rules for high priority leads are driven from Marketo or Salesforce?
It can be either. There's again, depending on the company structure. Like I've worked with loads of different people in my time as a consultant. I keep bouncing around. But I tend to like having the control of that and that assignment, because then I'll get the most visibility. So if I'm closer to Marketo, my answer is Marketo, because I can control that assignment more carefully, and I can control then when it goes over to that person and stuff like that. And if I can set the rules, then I hold the keys, and then it enables me to have better conversations. So Marketo is my answer solely from the reason that I prefer to have the keys rather than sales ops.
And so when sales ops holds the keys of routing, and in particular, I found that most Salesforce users do Salesforce assignment rules. What, as a marketing leader or marketing ops owner, are the challenges of having to go ask the Salesforce Apex, coder to update your assignment rules?
Yeah, I think you already know the answer. To that, you probably faced it so many times. But my answer is you better build a bloody good relationship with your sales ops and sales team and having that connectivity there. And even if it means just slacking someone that you haven't spoken to a while in that team and asked about their day, that's something as simple as that people often forget about. That our sales ops are not telling us, or they've changed the rules again. Just reach out and have a conversation. So there's often a two-way thing. So because they'll talk to you about it. So my answer to your question is, if they hold the keys, you better have a really good relationship with them, because otherwise anything that you do is probably going to be redundant at some point when they switch something off, or there's no communication there. And I think that goes for business wide. No matter how big you are, make sure that like you as a person, even if your manager or team doesn't do it, build relationships early on and get yourself known as a person, because you will find out more. And that goes for virtually, right? Even the times we're in, you'll just get little nuggets of information that will go, that's interesting. We hadn't thought about that. Or actually, yeah, I needed to know that because I've got a campaign that's based on that, and you've just changed all the rules.
Awesome. I've got two more questions for you. One is, you've worked in a lot of Marketos. I'm not sure if you've done the, negotiations on licensing, but based on your knowledge of how much Marketo is costing customers and how many records they're able to hold in their system, can you provide a ballpark of what a single email in Marketo costs? Is it like half a cent? Is it 10 cents? Is it like $1 a record to host a record in Marketo?
Oh, that's a tough question, John. That is a very tough question. So the pricing is based on so there's the basic licensing cost and hosting, and then there is the number of records that you hold, right? So I'm looking at my calculator here thinking, how am I going to answer John's question? But actually, I think it's going to be expensive if you get it wrong, but it's going to be cheap if you get it right, because it's not just the initial cost, it's the return on investment of that. So you consider everything, including opportunity cost of doing something else. Then I find it more difficult to answer your question when when you account for everything. I feel like that was a trick.
Yeah, the question is really driving more towards, I see a lot of times, I have a customer who has 1 million record storage limit, and and maybe they've gone over 20,000 records, and they know that they have dirty data in their database. And they can buy more storage, or they can go and purge data. What I'm trying to get is to have a Marketo admin, the owner of a tool, know the actual physical cost on an invoice. If they're charging for storage, where it's, hey, you get 500,000 records, and that storage is $75,000. If you go to, 1 million records, that's $125,000. You could actually divide the cost by the number of records and get a cost per email hosted dollar amount. And I don't think it's like common knowledge for a lot of people who want to reduce the storage of how much an actual record costs. What my question really is, and you can answer that you don't know, but do you know about how much a single record costs in Marketo? Licensing.
I find it difficult to answer that, and it's not that I don't know, it's just that I'm aware of all the different instance sizes and how successful or how likely a lead is to become an opportunity. So all these things go in I could work it out if you gave me one instance. So you were saying what, 1 million? And
yes, 1 million records. If I at 1 million records, what am I paying per record for Marketo storage?
So let's figure this out. Start the timer. Yeah. So we're licensing for 1 million records, what, like 100 grand, something like that, 125 grand? Is that what you were basing it on?
I was just giving a ballpark figure. I'm not sure. I bought Marketo for us. I guess I could tell you what we're paying.
I've done the pricing like last year when it was like for a database of a small database of like 400K. I think it was like 50K plus extras.
Yeah. So 80 over 500. It's costing us about 16 cents a record. So yeah, cool.
But it can be expensive as like, I've seen it as expensive as like $4 a record.
Yeah, I have a small company on the passion project, and I just needed to host like 5,000 or 10,000 records, and the entry cost for Marketo is going to be $15,000 a year. So yeah, it can definitely it can definitely cost in the dollar range per record if you're a smaller company.
Well, the highest I've seen it is like I think it was like $27 a record or something because they were so unsuccessful with their usage of Marketo. But that's the highest. Like they were like terrible at converting it, and to be frank, it was just they had data all over the place and they were paying a lot for it. But yeah, there's lots of different variables there, but I think once you take into the other variables, okay, what's our conversion rate and all the rest of it, and taking into account all that opportunity cost that you could be spending that on LinkedIn, which people say is expensive. But if you look at the cost per conversion there versus other platforms, it's less expensive. So it's kind of interesting.
I'd agree on B2B all day right there. I love advertising on LinkedIn. Last question, Warren, what are the top 3 recommendations you can make to any of the listeners to create and maintain a clean data environment in Marketo?
Number 1 is look at what the bad data is stopping you doing. And so an example would be, we can't target on industry because bad data, right? So if that's stopping you being able to have a conversation in a different way, or to be able to, it's stifling your creativity, is look at what the bad data is stopping you doing, and then look to fix that specific part. So if it is, you have an idea around industry, if you have an idea around how many times someone has logged into the piece of software that you're, try and fix the specific thing that's going to enable you to do that or have more ideas. So look at it from that lens. Number 2 on the recommendations would be opportunities to standardize and have automated processes to standardize. So you could literally go on Upwork now and you could hire 20 people for under $5 or something to just literally have a look at a list for you if you wanted to. That's still going to be way cheaper than working it out yourself to come up with a mechanism to which you can standardize and put in those rules in place. So standardize where you can, and if you can't, because there's so many different answers, you can still get people relatively cheap to do that. And that sometimes is a good option, right? Because you'll look at that and go, there's too many things here, I can't do all this myself. You just outsource it, right? Like, who cares? Everyone benefits. So standardize where possible is my second thing. And the third one is work out why we need to keep that data. Because often what muddies the waters a little bit is that you go, okay, we've got this data set and it's all muddled. Now, there's a good chance that that's going to keep getting muddled with other data sets and starts to get confusing, particularly when you go into uploads or integrations with different things. You're just pushing in more data that you're going to have to think about. And that, as a finer point there, the thinking about it is like is a key point in terms of, I don't want to have to think about bad data, so why would I push it into my database? So think about what data you actually need and keep that.
Well, thank you so much today, Warren, for joining our video cast. The listeners are going to get a tremendous amount of value from everything that you brought today. And we really appreciate your time on the show today.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. I hope I didn't go off on one and too much from a marketing side, but I have to approach the data as a marketer. I always will do.
Not at all. You know, every person's got a unique point of view, and you just have a very qualified set of credentials, and I'm glad that we had a chance to speak with you today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Awesome.